Hey guys, so today's webinar is going to just give a bit more of a background explanation on authorization and authentication, specifically OAuth2, and why Udacity uses Facebook and Google to provide OAuth2. Okay, so basically, what we're first going to look at is the difference between authentication and authorization. So basically, authentication is just confirming that you are who you actually say you are, So obviously, if people want what you have, one of the easiest ways to start getting it is to pretend to be you. So the most common use case of this would be in bank fraud, where that's why there's so much identity theft. So the banks have maybe the biggest problem is for people that look after other people's money, or organizations that look after people's money, so banks. So identity fraud would be with banks as the biggest problem, and then the second biggest would probably be with websites, valuable websites. So getting into obviously then your banking sites, and then email and other important information of yours that people can gain financially from having access to. So all of that has to do with authentication, right? So a lot of new apps, banking apps will use your fingerprint for access. So that's pretty cool because it's almost impossible to pretend to be you if they don't have your actual fingerprint. So it's close to largely solved by something like fingerprint access, but without that, the next best thing would be a workflow, and OAuth2 is the best one for that. But now I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just first defining authentication. Authentication is just verifying that you are you, Okay, now obviously it's very difficult on the internet, you can't, well, I suppose now, as I was saying, with cell phones, you can use fingerprint, so that is probably the best, and you can see most banking apps allow for that. But unfortunately, you just need every user to then have a cell phone that has high quality fingerprint reader. And then you need to make sure that that's secure, because at the end of the day, it's still a piece of information. So if somebody intercepts that information they shouldn't, then they can just mimic your the information that's recorded when people check your fingerprint, and then you have a problem. So essentially, it comes down to the what people have been using for a long time, which is just a password that you should keep private. And as soon as it's no longer private, then it's easy for people to pretend to be you, and it becomes more difficult for applications to authenticate you. So yeah, that's what authentication is. Now, authorization has nothing to do with verifying that you are you. Authorization has to do with what you are allowed to do. So the most obvious example, I think, was already given in the Udacity lecture by Lorenzo Brown, where he talks about a passport. Right? So a passport although a passport does both, a passport tells that you are who you are, but it also tells you, but it also gives information about what you are authorized to do. So, for example, um, me personally, I am not a American citizen, so I don't have an American passport. I have a South African passport, and so I am not authorized to, say, travel to Europe without a visa. Whereas I think Americans are authorized to travel to Europe without a visa. So authorization is different for everybody. No, sorry. Authorization has to do with what you are able to do, what from the perspective of web applications, it's what you are authorized to gain access to. So, for example, you know, if you have a Netflix account, first they have to authenticate you, so figure out who you are. No, first they have to authenticate you and say you are who you say you are. And then, so say you were a Netflix user, so they know it's you, you've got a password, you log in, but you stopped paying or you changed credit cards, so they haven't received payment from you. Then, although they know who you are, so although authentication is working perfectly, you still might not be able to use Netflix because you haven't paid, so you're not authorized to do it. So um, that would be authorization. So hopefully, before you go any further in implementing OAuth2 on an application of yours, it's just really important for you to figure out the difference between authorization and authentication. Okay, so what are the pros and cons of let's take a step back first. If we're looking at authorization and authentication, if you put these together, right, together you would use them together to know what service to provide to who. So first you find out who it is that's using your application or your service that your application provides, and then what they're allowed. So perhaps there's different levels of access depending on how much money your users pay, or say, for example, there's age group specific content. So managing your access and your basically your what you're allowed to view and who is viewing what together are going to be authorization and authentication. And managing this can be very difficult. There's so many things that you have to consider. You need to essentially all this is people logging into your site. So verifying that they are who they say they are, and then managing what they're allowed to access. Okay, so doing this becomes a huge logistical task. It can be quite fun and interesting, and it's fantastic when you get your hands on it. But when you get your head around it and you get pretty good at it. But most people don't go into full stack web development to become authorization and authentication experts. Generally people that want to become security experts would have more interest in that. And so the important thing is to know that if this is not what you want to spend your time on when you're becoming a application developer, then there are shortcuts. And one of them is to use a trusted protocol or workflow. And by far the most popular is OAuth2. So OAuth2, obviously everybody knows, and that's simply when an application, when you get to the sign up page, it allows you to sign in and sign up using a third party application. And usually it would be a very well known one like Google or Facebook. So now there's pros and cons to doing this. So the pros of this would be that you no longer have to manage passwords of your users. You don't have to manage any of their information, right? So that's great. There's a lot less functionality that you would have to implement on your application. There's a lot less responsibility, and you can focus rather in the beginning on building a high quality application. In the beginning, when people visit new applications, this is definitely true for myself. I'm sure it's true for you and most people. When you register, when you're faced with a long, tedious registration process for a new application, sometimes it might not even be worth your effort, and you just pass and don't use the application. And so, if you're building a new application and you want users, you don't want to put them off by, you know, providing a new registration system when alternatively they've already got an account that they trust with a large organization like Facebook or Google. Then OAuth2 is just so much easier, just administratively, and it just lowers the barrier to entry for people to use your application. So basically, they do one-click sign up, maybe 2 clicks, instead of filling out all new information. And then they also don't have to remember a new password, which I think people are so tired of doing. Um, Another pro of it is that maybe you don't use Google or Facebook. There's quite a few others that are quite large, quite trusted, and widespread that people use. So GitHub is a great one for developers. And another is LinkedIn. So plenty of people use LinkedIn. I think that Twitter is also used quite a lot. So there will just, I guess, with time be more and more applications that you can, trusted applications that you can use. So those would be the pros. The cons are that there is a possibility that one of them could mess up. So if they do, if they have a security breach and your users' information was used, right, your users' information on your application could possibly, not always, be at risk, and it wouldn't have been your fault. So you basically depending on the reliability of some third party. So depending how secure you are, you will or will not do this. And the easiest way to see how this is weighed up is that most people allow OAuth2, but if it's really, really high risk, very important, the service that you provide and security is of utmost importance, then you don't use it. So you'll never see a banking application that uses it. So never use it. So yeah, it just depends, and that's because of this one con, which is they could mess up. Another is that a lot of people are moving away from social media and a lot of big companies, so they may not have an account with any of these companies. They also may not want to use one of these other companies to deal with the information on that they'll be dealing with your application for. So it's still it all just comes down to your level of experience and how much time and effort you want to put into getting good at OAuth. And then it all depends, into, securing users and their information. And then it will depend on the type of users that you have. at the end of the day, probably the best is to have a combination where people can sign up with you without using a third party, but also have the option to use a third party. So, and I think that's what you'll see with most applications, and that probably is the best way to go. So the problem with OAuth2 for most new users is that it's a bit complicated and not very intuitive in how it works. So just got some advice here on really nailing down the workflow and really understanding it. You know, if you don't, you're never going to implement it well. So basically what you want to do is you really want to understand what the point of the client ID is. You really want to understand what the point of the tokens are and what the point of one-time use codes are, when they're used, and why they're used. And once you understand it at that level, then it becomes a whole lot easier to implement. However, if you understand it at that level, there's still one other, depending on who you are and what your level is of, or how much of experience you have with web development. Sorry, all I'm getting at is that you really just need to understand JavaScript quite well, because it's implemented in the browser, and so it's implemented with JavaScript. So you really just need to understand JavaScript and know what you're doing. So Lorenzo in the Udacity course implements quite a lot of the functionality using JavaScript. And I remember when I did this course, I wasn't very good at JavaScript, and so I didn't really know what was going on in the beginning, and I had to just slow down and really spend some time understanding JavaScript, which when I actually tried to do that, it wasn't too difficult. But if you're trying to get by without really understanding JavaScript, it's a bit frustrating, and you're probably not going to be able to do it. Or if you're quite smart, you might be able to. I wasn't able to, but it's quite difficult. So yeah, one good way to really get to understand it is to go through a Stack Overflow post on Olaf's Bakery, and that just really is an interesting way of describing what actually happens. So in OAuth2, there's 3 parties. So there will be your application, there will be your user, and then there will be the third party. So that will be, let's say we use Google, for instance. So Google already has all of your users' information. It's trusted with the user trusts Google with a password, right? And Google doesn't have to trust your application, right? But what happens is that your application passes you on to Google, and Google asks you, do you allow this application, meaning your application, to have access to some of your information? And then you will see there's lots of information that your application can request from the user. You might just want their name. So for example, if it's a very basic application, that's all you need. And I think that it's best to actually just use as little information as possible. When you request too much information, the user could easily just say no. So it just depends on how badly the user wants to use your application and how much information they're prepared to give. So essentially what happens is that if the user agrees, then Google knows that the user is fine with you having access to some of the user's information. And then what happens is an account is created without you securing any of the user's details, but you have the user. And essentially all you're doing is setting that up. So if the flow and doesn't make too much sense, and you don't really know what the client ID is, the token, and the one-time use code, then I would recommend going to Stack Overflow. I'll put the link. I'll share the link with you guys. And reading through Olaf's Bakery, and then the first comment, which goes through the complementary reading that's more specific to really solidify the concept. I didn't understand it in the beginning, and then I went through that, and yeah, I was able to understand it quite well. So if you do that, essentially you will understand it really well, and then you basically just go through the implementations step by step, the way that Lorenzo does, and you should master it after doing that 2 or 3 times. Yeah, I think we already discussed it, but then the last thing to just think about would be which OAuth2 provider do you want to use for your application? So which one is best? If you just have, say, an application where none of it really matters, so say a general application, well, I don't know, there's so many of these, but where it doesn't really matter too much, then the best is to just use all of them implemented in a slightly different way. So it'll give you a lot more practice, but if I were you, I would just do as many as possible, up to a certain amount, up to say 3, 4, or maximum 5. And you'll see most sites do that as well. And have your own login as well option. And that should be more than enough. So hopefully you put in a good amount of time into this and just solidify the concepts, and then you'll just have them and they'll be useful going forward as an application developer. So I hope this was helpful in just highlighting what's important and how to learn it. And yeah, if you have any questions, just let me know. I think we'll go to the AMA now, the weekly AMA. But yeah, thanks guys. I hope this was useful. So I'll chat to you in the AMA. Thanks.